Before the world carved Africa into pieces, its people walked the earth as kings, as scientists, as world builders. But the story you were taught is incomplete, because hidden in the shadows are truths too powerful to ignore. Truths that rewrite where civilization began. Truths they never wanted you to see. In this journey, you will uncover 3 secrets. The real origin of black civilization. The knowledge that built empires when the world was still in darkness. And the legacy they tried but failed to erase. Long before maps and flags, small bands of humans left East Africa, following coastlines and rivers. They weren't an army, just families with fire, stone tools, and courage. Wave after wave over tens of thousands of years, they crossed the Red Sea, spread along the Indian Ocean rim, and reached deep into Eurasia and beyond. Archaeological sites and ancient DNA point to multiple out-of-Africa pulses, not a single exodus. Climate windows opened and closed, sea levels rose and fell. Each shift nudged people outward. The trail they left behind? Stone flakes, hearths, shell middens, and, much later, genes that still whisper where we began. Modern genetics shows all living humans are cousins, branches from an African trunk. Whether in Seoul or Sao Paulo, genetic variation traces back to populations in Africa. We look different today because small groups adapted to new environments, but we began as one story. Bottlenecks during migrations reduced diversity outside Africa, which is why African populations hold the deepest genetic richness. The takeaway: difference is recent and skin-deep, kinship is ancient and profound. Before foreign ships ever saw its shores, Africa was a mosaic. Hundreds of languages, trade corridors, spiritual systems, and political models from city-states to empires. The continent was never one story, it was many, braided together. From Niger-Congo to Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan to Khoisan, language families revealed deep time and movement. Ideas, goods, and technologies flowed across ecozones long before foreign contact, knitting regions into dynamic networks. The Nile was a living road. In its southern reaches, Nubia nurtured kingdoms that mined gold, mastered archery, traded ivory, and built monumental centers that spoke the language of power in stone. Nubia and Egypt weren't strangers, they were neighbors, rivals, partners, trading goods and ideas. Power shifted across the river's spine, shaping art, administration, warfare, and religion in both directions. Before pharaohs wore crowns of unified Egypt, powerful cultures rose along the Nile's southern spine. Kerma flourished with vast mud brick architecture and royal tumuli. Later, Kush would rule Egypt as the 25th dynasty, a southern renaissance in stone. Pre-dynastic Egypt wasn't born in isolation. It grew from Nile cultures exchanging styles, beliefs, and power. The river was a ladder, climbed by those who organized people, controlled resources, and wrote themselves into time. Aksum rose on highland plateaus, minted its own coins, carved stele that pierced the sky, and linked Africa to Arabia and India. It adopted Christianity early and projected power across the Red Sea. Ethiopia's highlands became a crossroads. Faiths met, scripts evolved, and trade routes stitched continents. Its resilience echoed across centuries, proof that African states wrote their own chapters in world history. Where rain was fickle and soils tricky, West and Central African farmers domesticated hardy crops, millet, sorghum, and yams, that turned savannas into bread baskets and supported urban life. With iron hoes and smart rotations, communities engineered food security. Markets thrived, caravans moved grain, and population centers grew, proof that technology isn't just metal and stone, it's also seeds and knowledge. Centuries before many European regions forged at scale, West Africa's Nok culture mastered ironworking, and the Great Lakes region refined powerful furnaces, turning ore into tools that reshaped daily life. Iron was civilization's multiplier. Farms expanded, forests cleared, crafts specialized, and trade intensified. Metallurgy wasn't only tech, it was community organization, ritual, and skill passed across generations. Along the Swahili coast, stone towns rose beside turquoise waters. Monsoon winds carried dhows to Arabia, India, and beyond. Gold, ivory, spices, and stories flowed through coral wall harbors. Swahili culture blended African roots with Arabic and Persian influences, seen in language, architecture, and dress. Cosmopolitan long before modernity, these ports made the Indian Ocean a black-blue superhighway. Before Europe's ascendancy, African polities powered trade networks, supplied coveted resources, advanced sciences, and stabilized regions as empires rose and fell elsewhere. Africa wasn't waiting to be discovered, it was participating. From the Nile to the Niger, from Aksum to the Swahili coast, Africa connected worlds. Its cities, crafts, and knowledge seeded the very systems that would later reshape the planet. Before the word race was engineered, the ancient world spoke of lands, rivers, and peoples, Kush and Kemet, Numidia and Carthage, Aksum, and the Swahili seas. Across these names runs a truth too often erased. Black presence did not arrive late to history, it shaped it. South of Egypt, the Nile widens into a corridor of kingdoms known to the ancients as Kush and Nubia. For millennia, Nubians traded with Egypt, fought Egypt, served as elite archers, and at times ruled Egypt. This was not a single story of conquest or subservience, but a long relationship of exchange, rivalry, and power. In the 8th century BCE, Nubian rulers rose from Nepeta and Meroe, unifying a divided Egypt. The world would later call them the Black Pharaohs, the 25th dynasty, names like Pi, Shabaka, Shabitku, Taharka, Tantamani. They restored temples, revived traditions, and defended the Nile against foreign empires. Their monuments and inscriptions still speak, in stone, of a proud African court seated on the throne of the two lands. Among them, Taharka stands tall, a king mentioned in ancient records for his campaigns and building projects. Under the 25th dynasty, Kushite aesthetics, broad noses, tightly curled hair, distinctive royal beards, were carved into Egyptian stone. The art was African, the state was Egyptian, the dynasty was both. This is how history actually looked, connected, not boxed into modern categories. Across the Mediterranean, North Africa was not a frontier, it was a center. Carthage, founded by Phoenician mariners, grew into a maritime superpower, trading with Berber kingdoms inland and sailing beyond the pillars of Heracles. Its world was African and Mediterranean at once, purple dye, silver, grain, ideas. To the west and south, Numidia and Mauritania rose, led by kings like Massinissa and later Timbuktu, African courts fluent in diplomacy, cavalry tactics, and scholarship. Long before Roman conquest, African states were shaping Mediterranean history on their own terms. In 711 CE, armies crossed from North Africa into the Iberian Peninsula. The Moors, a mosaic of Berbers and Arabs with documented black African regiments and scholars over the centuries, planted the seeds of Al-Andalus. Cities like Cordoba and Granada became centers of astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and art. While Moor was a broad term, the historical record preserves black presence, from soldiers in frontier garrisons to learned figures at courts influenced by North Africa. Al-Andalus was a bridge, and Africa was one of its pillars. Classical authors often wrote of Ethiopians as peoples from Africa's sunlit south. In Near Eastern reliefs and texts, Africa appears in tribute scenes, trade caravans, and military levies. To the east, Africa's Indian Ocean links carried people and goods between East Africa, Arabia, and the Indus for millennia. Over time, this connection produced African-descended communities in South Asia, the city/Habshi, well documented in the medieval and early modern eras. For deep antiquity, evidence of specific African individuals in Mesopotamian courts is limited. What we do see clearly is a long Afro-Asian exchange through Red Sea and Indian Ocean routes. You'll hear claims that Dravidian peoples of India descend from ancient African migrations. Here's the balanced view. All humans trace to Africa in deep time, and the Indian Ocean foster exchange, but a direct, ancient African to Dravidian lineage is not a consensus among scholars. It's a theory, not settled fact. What's undeniable, across centuries, African sailors, merchants, and soldiers reached the subcontinent, leaving living communities and cultural footprints. The Olmec colossal heads, carved in Mexico long before Columbus, spark a fierce debate. Some point to their features and argue an ancient African presence. Mainstream archaeology explains them as indigenous Mesoamerican portraits of rulers, carved in a local style. Our position is curiosity with caution. The Atlantic currents are real and African seafaring existed, but firm archaeological proof of Africans in the ancient Americas before Columbus remains unconfirmed. Ancient armies were cosmopolitan. Greek writers mention Ethiopian archers. Roman inscriptions record African units, from Numidian cavalry famed for speed and skirmish tactics to Mauritanian cohorts on distant frontiers. Emperors of North African origin, like Septimius Severus, commanded the Roman world. Labels like black didn't exist then as they do now, but the African presence, soldiers, settlers, merchants, did. Classical writers record African queens whose leadership shook empires. In the 1st century BCE, Queen Amanirenas of Kush fought Rome to standstill. Roman sources speak of a formidable Candace, a royal title in Meroe, who blinded and won, I still led her armies. Amanishakheto built wealth and monuments that dazzled early travelers. These women weren't footnotes, they were headlines in the annals of the Nile and Sahara. From the Sahara's caravan veins to Red Sea and Indian Ocean monsoon routes, Africans move gold, salt, ivory, iron, and stories across continents. Swahili cities traded with Arabia and India. Carthaginian navigators mapped Atlantic coasts. Nubian and Egyptian priests exchanged theology and art. This is the world before modern borders, a world of routes, not walls. When we restore these connections, black presence in antiquity is no longer a mystery. It's a map. Before the world knew skyscrapers, before Europe dreamed of empire, Africa was already home to kingdoms of gold, stone, wisdom, and power. Civilizations that rose like giants, shaping trade, science, and faith long before outsiders set their gaze upon the continent. This is the story of Africa's great kingdoms. Centuries before Columbus, there was Ghana, not the modern nation, but a mighty empire between the Niger and Senegal rivers. Ghana flourished between the 6th and 13th centuries, ruling over the trade of salt and gold, the lifeblood of medieval economies. Arab chroniclers wrote of Ghana's kings sitting in splendor, surrounded by golden regalia, with dogs wearing golden collars. This was no backwater, it was a financial powerhouse. Caravans stretched across the Sahara, carrying gold northward and bringing salt, cloth, and horses south. To the Arabs, Ghana was a land where gold grew from the earth. To its people, it was the foundation of wealth and civilization. From Ghana's ashes rose Mali, reaching its peak under Mansa Musa in the 14th century. Musa is remembered as the richest man in history. On his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he brought so much gold that it devalued currency in Cairo for years. But Musa was more than wealth, he was a builder of culture. Under his rule, Timbuktu became a global hub of learning, with universities, libraries, and mosques. At Sankore University, manuscripts cover mathematics, astronomy, law, and medicine, knowledge centuries ahead of Europe. Mansa Musa's empire was not just golden in riches, but golden in wisdom, proof that Africa was a fountain of learning long before colonial lies. After Mali, the Songhai Empire rose to power in the 15th and 16th centuries. Its capital, Gao, and its jewel, Timbuktu, attracted scholars from across Africa, Arabia, and even Europe. Songhai rulers like Askia Muhammad made the empire not just powerful militarily, but also intellectually advanced. Timbuktu housed over 700,000 manuscripts, covering everything from surgery to philosophy. This empire proved Africa was not in isolation, but a center of global knowledge. Far to the south, in present-day Zimbabwe, stood the stone ruins of Great Zimbabwe. Built between the 11th and 15th centuries, its stone walls, some stretching 36 feet high, still baffle historians. Great Zimbabwe controlled the trade of gold and ivory, linking Africa to the Indian Ocean trade network. Archaeological evidence shows contact with China, Persia, and Arabia through imported goods. Long before skyscrapers, Africa was already building stone cities that defied time itself. In Central Africa, the Kingdom of Congo rose around the 14th century. With its capital at Mbanza, Congo, it stretched across parts of today's Angola and Democratic Republic of Congo. The kingdom had a sophisticated system of governance, provinces ruled by nobles, and a king chosen through council consensus. Even Portuguese explorers in the 15th century marveled at its order and power. One of Africa's oldest continuous civilizations was Ethiopia. The Kingdom of Aksum, 1st to 7th century, traded with Rome, India, and Arabia, and carved the legendary obelisks of Aksum from single stones. Ethiopia became one of the first Christian nations in the 4th century, long before Europe's conversion. Later rulers built the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, carved directly into mountains, architectural wonders that stand today. Ethiopia stood as a Christian beacon in Africa, a land where stone itself became a cathedral. Stretching from Somalia to Mozambique, the Swahili coast flourished between the 10th and 16th centuries. Cities like Kilwa, Sofala, and Zanzibar became international trading hubs, connecting Africa with India, Arabia, China, and Persia. They traded gold, ivory, spices, and slaves, but also shared culture, architecture, and language. Swahili culture was a blend of African and Islamic worlds, creating a vibrant civilization with coral stone mosques and bustling harbors. In present-day Nigeria, the Benin Kingdom rose in the 11th century. The kingdom was famous for its bronze and brass sculptures, artworks so advanced that Europeans could hardly believe Africans made them. Benin City was protected by massive earth walls, some longer than the Great Wall of China. Its obus, kings, ruled with divine authority, blending spiritual and political power. In the Lake Chad region, the Kanem-Bornu Empire thrived for over 1,000 years. It controlled vital Saharan trade routes, dealing in salt, slaves, and textiles. Its rulers, known as Mai, expanded influence through both military power and Islamic scholarship. The empire endured waves of invasions but persisted as one of Africa's longest-lasting dynasties. Before slavery, before colonization, Africa was not a dark continent, it was a shining land of kingdoms. A continent of builders, scholars, warriors, and artists. Ghana, Mali, Songhai, Zimbabwe, Congo, Ethiopia, Benin, Kanem-Bornu, and the Swahili coast. These were Africa's cathedrals, its pyramids, its skyscrapers. A reminder to the world, Africa was never waiting to be discovered. Africa was always alight, burning bright long before outsiders arrived. Africa stood at a crossroads of faith, trade, and conquest. From the 7th century, Arab armies swept across North Africa, carrying not only the sword but also the message of Islam. Cities like Cairo, Timbuktu, and Kano became centers of learning, linking Africa to the vast Islamic world. Yet even before colonialism, Christianity had already spread deep into Africa. In Ethiopia, Nubia, and across parts of North and Central Africa, proving the continent's role as one of the earliest homes of global faith. By the 15th century, Portuguese ships appeared on Africa's western coasts. They came for gold, spices, and new routes, but soon their arrival reshaped African destiny. Trade across the Sahara had long shifted the balance of power, connecting empires like Mali and Songhai to the wider world. But now a darker trade began. Slavery moved from being local and war-driven to becoming a transatlantic machine, feeding European economies. Yet Africa did not bow easily. From the Swahili coast to the Kingdom of Congo, resistance rose against invaders. Still, the hunger for resources grew. By the 19th century, the so-called Scramble for Africa saw Europe carve the continent into colonies. And with conquest came control of the mind. Early European depictions of Africans painted them as primitive, childlike, or less than human. These myths of racial hierarchy were not accidents. They were deliberate tools of empire, justifying slavery and colonization. In these encounters and invasions, Africa's story was not just lived, it was rewritten. A proud continent was forced into the margins of its own history, even as it fought to remain center stage. The transatlantic slave trade began in the 15th century when Europeans sought labor for the Americas. African rulers and middlemen, sometimes complicit, supplied captives in exchange for guns, cloth, and alcohol. Millions were captured, shackled, and marched to coastal forts. The Middle Passage, the voyage across the Atlantic, was a floating prison of disease, starvation, and death. Those who survived carried with them languages, songs, and traditions that rooted African culture in the New World. But enslaved Africans were not just victims, they resisted. From revolts aboard ships to uprisings in colonies, they fought for dignity. Intellectuals like Olaudah Equiano wrote their truth, and revolutions like Haiti's proved that freedom was possible. Europe's rise was built on this trade. Sugar, cotton, and tobacco enriched empires, while Africa bled its people. The racist ideologies forged to justify slavery would shape centuries of oppression. Yet, through resilience, the African identity survived across oceans, keeping memory alive. By the 19th century, European powers turned to Africa itself. At the Berlin Conference of 1884-85, the continent was carved up like a map without its people's consent. Kingdoms were split, borders drawn, and divide-and-rule strategies deepened ethnic rivalries. Colonialism was more than conquest, it was an erasure. Schools rewrote history to paint Africa as primitive. Pseudoscience and racial hierarchies were invented to justify domination. Christianity was used as a tool of control, while missionaries dismantled traditional systems. But Africa resisted. Leaders like Samori Touré, Menelik II, and countless warriors fought invasions. Still, colonial economies extracted wealth, leaving behind poverty traps that persist today. Even maps erased Africa's greatness, shrinking the continent visually. Yet, amid oppression, seeds of Pan-Africanism sprouted. Thinkers like Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois called for unity, planting the dream of liberation. After slavery and colonization, black identity transformed across continents. In Europe, formerly enslaved people and their descendants shaped culture despite discrimination. In the Americas, emancipation led to new struggles, segregation, labor exploitation, and systemic racism. In the Caribbean, music, religion, and rebellion became weapons of survival. Across Africa, independence movements in the 20th century broke colonial chains. Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and beyond declared freedom. In the U.S., civil rights and black power redefined equality and pride. In South Africa, apartheid fell under the weight of resistance led by figures like Mandela. Cultural movements, Rastafari, reggae, hip-hop, became voices of global resistance. But neo-colonialism and exploitation continue. Today, black identity is global, shaped by migration, struggle, art, and resilience. It is not just about survival, but about reclaiming power. Restoring Africa's story means rewriting what was stolen. It begins with reclaiming history, telling the truth of kingdoms, scholars, and heroes erased from textbooks. Oral traditions, songs, and stories must be preserved, not forgotten. The myths of inferiority must be broken. Black excellence in science, medicine, and art, from Imhotep in ancient Egypt to modern innovators, must be celebrated. Africa is rising again, in technology, culture, and economics. The diaspora reconnects through Pan-Africanism, bridging the gap between homeland and scattered peoples. This is not just history, it is identity. To restore the legacy is to honor the past, fight the propaganda, and embrace Africa's truth, the mother of humanity, and a continent of endless light.